For over a year, I wondered if I was too mean to Disenchantment. Now, I feel entirely justified in proclaiming my disappointment with this show. Part 2 to the first season was released a few days ago, and I went in with strangely high hopes. Hell, I finished off my review of Part 1 thinking that the sauce just needed more time to thicken, but sadly no real improvement has been seen. For sure, this is Part 2 of the first season, so really my expectations of change are rather invalid. Maybe next year things might improve, but with a community of fans so obviously large and so clearly interested in the show, it has to be better than this. Otherwise, people will get too disinterested to bother watching the good stuff in the show. Today, I shall analyse the newest batch of Disenchantment episodes, outlining the highlights and downloads with a verdict on its overall quality by the end. So, without further ado, let's get on with the review. If you've seen my review of Part 1, you'll know I was a bit hit and miss with the humour presented in Disenchantment. I totally get that comedy is one of these extremely subjective things. What you find funny, I might not. It's as simple as that. What I'm going to present, however, are the bits I thought worked and didn't. And you're welcome to disagree with me in the comments below. So bite me, biatch! Let's start with the good. In episode 2, we get to see Heaven, and it is hilarious. Elfo's challenge to get himself out of Heaven made me laugh a lot, with a little dig at censorship too, which was really funny. His attempt to insult God just comes off as petty and proves how harmless his character is. Ultimately, it's Elfo's insulting God's new best friend that sent him away, which was great, but left me saddened by how short-lived all the stuff in Heaven was. One of the best new things this series brought to the table got less than 8 minutes of screen time, and I suspect this Heaven-Hell scenario was probably more for the trailers than anything else. Episode 3 starts off really strongly, with the Isle of Mermaids that were ready to eat Elfo on the beach that his corpse washed up on. You also had some really funny stuff happening in episode 8, possibly my favourite episode of Part 2. I'm not sure if it just resonated with me personally, but I loved this take on being a writer. It not only felt rather meta, but Bean as a character fits this position really well, finally feeling like she's got some kind of purpose. She writes a play alongside Lucy, the writing demon, personifying the mind. The discouragement, envy, and depression, encouraged also by drinking and procrastination, actually make Bea write a great piece of satirical work. This led to some really great gags as well. This is great.
I think maybe it was the lead makeup.
That's what you always say.
This is also great.
It's showtime.
All right, let me just get my opera glasses.
And this is perfect. And that's about it for the funny parts of Part 2. For the rest of it is just plagued with what I'll call, bad comedy. The first issue comes with jokes that are dragged out rather unnecessarily. When Dagmar settles her daughter into bed, she coos her to sleep with
Shut up. Shut up.
and the line was very funny, but it just kept going and immediately the candle was snuffed.
Go the hell to sleep.
Go the hell to sleep? What? Towards the middle of the series now, we have the king showing off his trapdoor to Ursula, the bear girl. So he's gotten the girl all royally dressed up and shows off his trapdoor. They laugh together, and then the actual joke appears when we see all his bearskin rugs and right beside them. You'd think she'd have seen all this when she entered the room anyway, right? But why they shoved in this trapdoor bit beforehand, I do not know. Oh yeah, and Shoko? Shoko was really funny in Part 1. This year they shoved him in again though, and it's just more of the same, but there are also rather repetitive jokes too. Elfo being in Heaven speaking through the screen was deja vu inducing and not in a good way. Not only is this gag in both promotional trailers, but if you're watching episodes back to back like me, you're gonna witness the same gag another 2 times on top. Meaning, if you follow this show in any capacity, you'll have likely heard this
Lady, you're the one that called me.
gag about 4 times. Back to that dreaded bear episode, the king rambles on about his love for her, and the same, oh, she's not there listening to you, zoom out joke happens twice.
I know everything about you. Your secrets, your desires, your loves. So that's why we're gonna have to say
You even have strange jokes like these from time to time as well.
I didn't sign up for this when I signed up for this.
They aren't repetitive per se, but they're just unfunny.
We finally got money to put in the vault since I spent all that money putting in the vault.
The most rubbing thing that happened though was that a couple of the jokes were stolen from other comedies.
As a reward, Baldric, take a short holiday. Did you enjoy it? Right.
I'm just about at the end of my 24-hour shift. There it is. Well, back to work.
God, they even stole a joke from Shrek for God's sake.
Oh.
You really must be scraping the bottom of the barrel if you're pinching jokes from something like Shrek. There were so many memorable characters in Futurama and The Simpsons that even the minor characters are interesting. In Disenchantment, characters are definitely something it struggles with. Aside from God and Zog, I couldn't tell you anything distinct about the catalogue of characters we are presented with this year. Only a minority of them actually care about anything, giving them next to no drive except towards their preordained locations. Like last year, King Zog stands out as being one of the funniest characters. His obsession with achieving gout and being overfed by Lucy just to give the impression of a typical medieval leader was highly amusing. Sadly, however, there was a seriously missed comedic opportunity in that Bloody Bear episode again. In the second scene of the episode, King Zog burns a book about ladies and also later burns the painting of his ex-wife Dagmar. So he's burned away his future and his past, and then he wonders what to do with the bear skin of his present partner.
Burn them all!
Burn it, right? That seems the next logical step to me. No, he puts it in a box and hides it away. The quote-unquote payoff for his love of fire comes instead at the very end of the series.
Oh, a fire. That's nice.
You gotta be kidding me.
Or maybe the joke's on me. He might just love fire more than women. Returning to the start of part 2, Bean meets Cloyd and Becky, Dagmar's disinteresting siblings. You know, those two weirdos that were overseeing Lucy in part 1? Yeah, well, they die in the first episode of part 2, so forget all of Lucy's double agent stuff. He can just buy Dreamland's only pub instead of having a character arc this year. Nothing's really going on with Elfo this year either, to be honest. The highlight was him playing Queen Dagmar during the play. After his resurrection, he kinda gets turned into a Jon Snow character, completely forgetting that he was raised from the dead and becoming rather insignificant as time goes on. Derek, the half-brother, gets pretty much forgotten about despite having a whole episode to himself. He's practically Ralph Wiggum at this point, a disgusting, under-matured brat, only difference is he's not funny at all. I was actually quite pleased that an episode was dedicated to him, thinking he might transform even slightly. In truth, he's not developed because he just makes friends with a giant octopus and gets rescued by Bean, which didn't even get brought up at the trial in the finale either. He never gets time to discuss his mother's disappearance either, nor does it really affect him in any way, merely acting as this Tommen Baratheon clone to rule as a puppet king with this regent who likes to have sexy parties. Tell me exactly what else makes Oddval interesting, cause I can't think of a single thing. Oh yeah, and the old man wizard that was fairly important to the first part doesn't show up until episode 7 this year. Why? Because there's no overarching storyline to give him or anybody else any purpose. But now we're going into story territory, so we might as well switch over to that now. In part 1, we had an overarching narrative of immortality, desired by King Zog and acquired from Elf's blood. This at least gave the show some backbone, conflict even, and I was honestly expecting Dagmar's return to be what would hold part 2 together. Sadly, this is not the case. The remaining content of part 2, up until episode 8, is fairly lackluster and has absolutely nothing to keep us hooked to watch more. Bean regrets her decision to pick her mother over her friend, which turns out to be a no mess, no fuss scenario because Elfo comes back by the end of the second episode anyway. From there, Bean gets a couple of insignificant dreams and rubs her back against some symbols. If this show was more like Futurama in structure, like how you can flick on any Futurama episode and get the gist of it provided you understand Fry's from the past, it might work better. Now, the obvious difference between both shows is that one was on TV and the other is streamable online. One show has the episode handed to you seemingly at random, the other you have to consciously pick out, or it will run chronologically. Sadly, Netflix doesn't have a random episode button, so the continuous storyline makes sense for the medium. But it's just not done very well. One thing I will credit the show for is that the trio aren't hell-bent on getting wasted every other episode, which I guess is one improvement. But like I said, part 2 doesn't get better until episode 8. It's a shame we have to sit through so much waffle in order to get there again.
As much as all this praise comes at the end, it only does so because of how much waffle you have to get through in order to appreciate the last 3 episodes.
Episode 8 acts as the most feminist story yet, depicting Bean's restrictions as a woman in a medieval world. She writes a play, but the theatre is males only. Not even her royal blood can grant her access. The pig character is actually utilised really well in this episode, essentially stealing Bean's thunder and performing to humour everyone despite the play was originally intended to be a drama. It unfortunately nosedives at the end somewhat when Bean gets urged onto the stage to do some stand-up. The show not only turns Bean temporarily into Marvelous Miss Maisel, amazing show by the way, go check it out, with the king just observing his own ridicule in the corner. Father and daughter then walk home and find it sad that life is a constant uphill battle, relating to how they always have to walk up the hill to get to the castle. I mean, it's kinda sweet, but God, what an anticlimax. Episode 9 had an interesting hook too. The idea that there's a city out there that's super scientific is totally alien in the fantasy realm, and was nice to have this curveball storyline appear seemingly out of nowhere. The best quality of the curveball comes in the form of a dragon, the biggest fantasy trope ever known, turning out to be a form of attack zeppelin instead. I was hoping that there would be some form of conflict between this new land and Dreamland, giving Bean a real hard time over which side to choose. After all, she did say this in the previous episode.
I hate Dreamland.
Both sides try to kill her, and it's not exactly like her mother was the biggest Dreamland patriot either. The problem though is that I knew, like with Heaven, it would be extremely unlikely this conflict would come about again when it should have been established earlier in the series. The king gets shot and I just stopped caring. I mean, it was so obvious he was going to survive when you establish your characters as being invincible. And then episode 10 just ends up being a bit of a shit show too. The king doesn't care that he's been replaced despite still being alive, and the trial was exactly as I expected it to go, not in Bean's favour, leading us to another cliffhanger. Now I think this same tactic was tried at the end of the first season because, as you know, I was quite optimistic for part 2. The problem is that they've just ended on a point that has me totally disinterested to find out what happens. Dagmar was basically forgotten about for the majority of part 2, even though she is like the antagonist of the series. My point though is that there's not enough consequence in this show to make it a worthy continuous story. There's nothing to really latch onto or pay attention to, because 90% of this show is just totally inconsequential. Derek getting rescued by Bean goes nowhere, and any of the breadcrumbs sprinkled around for Bean to follow regarding her mother went nowhere either. I don't doubt that Bean's cliffhanger conundrum will be resolved fairly swiftly in the opening episodes of part 3. Or season 2, part 1. Or season 3. Episode 21. One of those. I'm going to try and keep this section brief because there's not much difference between my thoughts now and my thoughts a year ago. Once again, please take any of my critiques on the animation side with a pinch of salt because I'm not an animator. There are, however, things that catch the eye. Last year, I complained about the backdrop quality being trash against the nicer character animations. It certainly didn't feel as bad this year, or maybe I'm just numb to the sight of it, but there are a couple of things that really did stick out. Firstly, there's Hell. I love the trippy path Lucy and Bean take towards the gate, but as they come back flying over that lava, that lava, nope. And this water here, nope. The steampunk place looked marvelous, but we spend so much time just staring at the surroundings and I start getting deja vu again.
It's the future.
Now I'm sure I can't be the only one who noticed this, and I'm not sure if this is more of a script problem than an animation problem, but just watch this.
Cloyd, help me take the fire to the temple. Jerry, you stay here and finish beating yourself.
Ow, 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 ow,
ow, ow.
No! No! I beg you! No!
You see what happened there? It's almost like the two siblings paused silently in the middle of this little hall and then continued on as if somebody pressed the play button when the shot changed. The same thing happens in episode 4. Check it out.
Hey, mister, come here. Wanna play slapjack?
Sure. Ow!
Here's your slapjack. Zippity, Doda, slap him!
It makes it look like Bean and Lucy walked a grand total of 2 more steps in the whole time that fight took place. Later in that same episode, the bear lady, yep, we're talking about her again, teleports in the maze. I'm not kidding.
Found you!
And just to top it all off, they couldn't even be bothered to animate some mouth movement right here.
A wrench? A wrench?
Disenchantment could be so much better. This project feels rushed and needs more care and attention because it has the potential to be good. I still think cancelling The Simpsons, so all that the creative energy can be put into one show instead of 2, is the way to go. The show also needs to make its mind up about what it wants to be, update some graphics cards, and maybe, just maybe, the show will become a bit more watchable. Thanks for watching. This video was released a day early on my Patreon page. Sign up today for as little as $1 a month for more content from your boy from Britain. Do you want to see me discuss other Netflix animations? Leave a comment below or let us know your thoughts on my Discord server, where we will continue this discussion.